Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Kyle Pudenz. Kyle is the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Analytics at Cencora. And my name is David Zhao, and I'm Managing Director of Coda Strategy. Kyle, welcome back to the interview series.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, last time when we spoke, you talked about speed, about how data that was relevant 24 hours ago may not be as useful today. So I wanted to follow up on this topic of speed. And so the first idea I want to bring to the table is that speed is a data problem across life sciences. So we want to bring drugs to market faster. We want to deliver them faster. And we want to research outcomes faster, detect adverse events better. Cencora in pharmaceutical distribution is sitting in the middle of all this data. So I wanted to ask if you could deep dive on your earlier comment. How do you turn raw data into market speed, specifically within Cencora's lane of the pharmaceutical value chain?
That's a good question. And I also think it's important to understand the actual need for speed and what speed means. In some contexts, for example, in our more of our supply chain distribution area where we're dealing directly with pharmacies who are servicing patients, they may be following up on an order and need real-time or near real-time information to understand what's the status of my order, where is it at, right? That need for speed is quite significant and presents more complex challenges in terms of, what's the latency of your data. That said, there are other needs. So whenever perhaps we have our manufacturer partners that need to understand what's the movement of their product through the supply chain, they may not need that real-time data, but they at least want to know that that data is no more than a day old, right? They want to understand what's the movement of their product through the supply chain. Where might there be challenges? Where are things they may need to address? Where can we work better together? So now suddenly that speed becomes defined a little differently. And then more long term, if we're looking at things like what does our customer segmentation look like? What is our overall approach to a given market? That becomes more important that we have good aggregated data, more contextualized data. And sometimes that context requires longer timelines, right? So we may not need that near real-time information there, but instead our models may actually be updated over time, maybe a week or two later when events happen downstream that we need to go back and provide additional context for the data we've gathered. So I think speed is all relative given the specific challenge that you're trying to solve. And it's an important consideration to make sure you're not over-indexing on making all data real time, but you're indexing for the right level of latency.
Got it. So what you're really saying is then, like, we have different speed lanes for different business problems, and it's appropriate for that business problem to drive in the right lane.
Absolutely. You could even have the challenge where if you make everything near real time, it may be too much noise, right? You may be getting too much static that's coming across. You haven't had enough time to really synthesize that information, provide that context in order to see what's really going on. So that you're making the right strategic adjustment. Speed, it's important to understand that actual problem you're trying to solve, what you're trying to address when you're considering the type of data, how recent of data, how aggregated you're using that information.
Now, can you give us a specific example, a concrete example of how you took one business problem and you picked the right lane to deliver faster data analytics and how that drove either Cencora's business strategy or really public health benefits at large. Do you have a specific concrete example that comes to mind?
Sure. So being a larger supply chain organization, it's been really important that we are able to address um, customer challenges, specifically related to things like product availability. That's been a huge challenge, I think, for a lot of supply chains over the last several years. In the world of pharma, that even predated COVID somewhat, but was really exacerbated by COVID. And what we've seen in a post COVID world is you haven't had the full recovery of those supply chains where you have total product availability that you may have enjoyed in the past. And there's a lot of factors that are driving that. But nonetheless, that doesn't change the fact that patients need their medication every day, right? There's a lot of times that you may have limitations from your insurer on how frequently you can replenish your medication, right? It's got to be less than so many days old. So, or so many days before your prescription expires before you can refill it. So super important that that product is available when you need it. You can't wait. So this is one where we've taken data we have on our upstream supply chain, and we're really building out solutions that help us identify what are immediate impacts to that supply chain. So perhaps an adverse weather event. We've actually had an issue in the last couple of years where a tornado hit a manufacturing plant and immediately took that offline, right? So we needed to understand immediately what was that impact to product availability. That is a true real-time, near real-time event that you need to understand. However, there could be longer term challenges, right? Just in terms of, is that manufacturer starting to slide in its ability to deliver products on time? This is an accumulating problem. So speed in that scenario is really understanding the longer term implications. So how do we adjust in order to really anticipate where we might have a looming challenge coming our way? That's a different level of speed. And we've built a solution that actually considers those two different types of extremes. One that's a little more tactical, one that's a little more on the strategic side, so that it helps us really take more proactive action.
Now, your discussion about product availability made me think. The flip side of speed is product availability and maintaining market access. So by that, I mean, speed does us no good if we have no product available to distribute. So I wanted to ask, is there a trade-off between speed and product availability? Do we have to balance product availability with speed for certain pharmaceuticals that may be supply constrained? I'm thinking of the very popular weight loss drugs. Maybe we use that as an example. So when there's constraints in the supply chain, how do we balance product availability with speed? Is there a trade-off, or can we have both? Can we have high availability and high speed?
So I think in terms of the data itself, the speed is really dependent on the specific situation you may be encountering. So take, for example, the weight loss drugs, these GLP-1s typically, that are a huge focus and something that's recently emerged and been a hot topic within the market. So there's the initial speed of understanding, where are my actual orders? Can I fill actual orders from pharmacies today? What are potential challenges with making that happen? But then there becomes a longer term understanding of what are the evolving cycles? What are the trends that we're seeing within even our order patterns, the types of customers that may be ordering these products? And that's where you don't necessarily need that immediate data, but you need to understand over the longer term, how are we seeing those trends change? It is super important, though, that you're able to act on those with some sense of speed. And so I think that's where you start to see, I wouldn't necessarily call it a trade off, but more of a complementary understanding of, again, what's the right data set? How recent do I need that? Or do I need a broader, more longitudinal data set that now I can start to really anticipate trends? And that can help me make both some strategic and tactical decisions, depending on the scenario.
I see. So what you're saying then is the time horizon of the business problem you want to address, the speed of your analytics has to match or reflect that time horizon. If it's a 1 day time horizon, then yeah, I need really fast data. But if it's a 12-month or 10-year time horizon, then we have a different speed consideration.
Right. And in that particular scenario, you actually have different um, use cases, if you will, right? You've got from our perspective, our supply chain team that does a phenomenal job managing these types of scenarios. They're really looking at a lot of that real time data to or next day data, perhaps, where they're aggregating all of the orders from the prior day to understand what has happened, where do they see that fitting in to recent trends. And so they're very much in that moment. Now they'll start to extend that out so they can plan their inventory, plan their interactions with the manufacturers to understand, hey, this is how we're going to place orders or the kind of inventory levels we're expected to keep. So that's one type of use case. You have our finance team, though, that is also trying to project, like, what are the implications of this from a financial perspective. Their visibility, their timeline is going to be a little different, right? They may not necessarily need that next day approach, but they're going through their monthly forecasting review or weekly in some cases for some really important items like these, to understand, what's happening, what's changing, what should they change in terms of their projections, and what are those larger impacts to the broader organization. So you can see just between those user groups. And I'll say there's a lot more in our process when it comes to these. We have all sorts of teams that are really always actively looking at our distribution patterns. But those two examples give you that extreme from that real time to longer term planning. And so the need for the data, the need of the speed can differ for each of those groups.
Yeah. And I love how you now have veered entirely towards who's my audience, what's their business problem, and now what do I do to address their problem? Well, Kyle, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. That's all the time we have. So I want to thank our audience for listening in as well. Again, my name is David Zhao, Managing Director of Coda Strategy, and I've had the pleasure of speaking with Kyle Pudenz, who is the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Analytics at Cencora. Kyle, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.